We've got Russia reasserting its aggressiveness. We have a president with fairly low or unpopular approval ratings. Inflation is rampant. It does feel kind of like the late 1970s all over again. What's going to happen in Washington?
Of course, that's what Republicans have wanted people to believe, that Joe Biden was another Jimmy Carter, and it's 1979. But that political point, I think as you point out, it's really resonating a lot more. And I think Biden is like the last thing the Biden agenda needs. I mean, it was already on fumes. The Build Back Better agenda looking, I think, highly unlikely at this point. This makes it worse. This is going to consume Washington. Washington will be talking about sanctions. It's going to be talking about ramping up defense spending. I mean, Joe Manchin before thought Build Back Better wasn't a priority. It looks like less of a priority now. And you mentioned those approval ratings by Joe Biden. They're around 40%. That's low. And if I were the American president, I would not want a 40% approval rating when there's a foreign policy crisis and you're heading right into the teeth of a Fed tightening cycle.
But there's a lot of understanding by the president around Ukraine because he dealt with them in 2014. He was vice president. They came in, they annexed Crimea. He was effectively sort of an attaché to the Ukrainian region. There is a deep personal history. He tweeted during his campaign that, you don't want to vote for anybody but Biden because he's the one that will go, quote, toe-to-toe, I think was his term, with Vladimir Putin. Well, now Vladimir Putin is testing President Biden. But, Jimmy, I got to imagine there's only so far he can go because most Americans are probably and rightfully struggling to understand what is the American connection to Ukraine. We don't rely on anything from them except for some small commodity exports. What is our role around Ukraine? I think it's going to be a hard sell to the American people.
I think it's for that exact point, Brian, that when we have the State of the Union address coming up, boy, I'd be surprised if he led off with a big, hard foreign policy. And listen, if things completely go south, this can change. But I think you're right. The number one thing people are worried about is inflation. For most people, a lot of people have never seen inflation. You have to get into the early Gen Xers and baby boomers who have seen inflation this high, and makes the economy look unstable. And I remember, Jim Cramer was on Twitter talking about what does any of this have to do with the price earnings multiple of Bristol Myers? That's kind of the investing version. Yet we see the market
zero, and the answer is nothing.
No. Yeah, I think the only.
I mean, there's a commodity, Jimmy. There's a commodity inflation aspect to that. I'm going to hit a little more on at the end of the show in the RBI. It's not just about oil and gas, but you are correct. For most American companies, the Ukrainian economy, I think, is the size of Delaware. Their GDP is $130 billion. The Russian economy is smaller than Canada, Italy, or South Korea. No disrespect to those countries, but in some way, could this be a welcome distraction from the inflationary news cycle, Jimmy? Now the president, if I'm the president's people, I'm going to say you now can blame nearly $100, probably soon to be $100 oil prices on Russia. You don't have to necessarily blame them on something else. You've got an out and maybe a welcome break from this constant news cycle about problems at the border, about problems with inflation, about problems maybe in getting the Build Back Better plan done.
Well, I don't think Jimmy Carter looked at the invasion of Afghanistan as a welcome diversion from the inflation and stagflation story at home. And the only other point I would make as a little bit of pushback to the, hey, what do we care about what's going on over there? If you look at historical price earnings multiples, they rarely got above 18 or so. This is Robert Schiller's work during the Cold War. Cold War is over. U.S. is the top of the global pecking order. We've rarely seen PE ratios below 18. What's it like now? Like the mid-20s? I would just throw that out there. And if you're wondering, what does this matter? If you're talking about a multipolar world order that looks a lot chaotic, I think there's a broader market economic impact.